This is the Omega Seamaster 300m Heritage Edition, and this is everything you need to know. Welcome back to Time in the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, and for those of you that know me, you'll know that I love Omega. I actually have an Omega Seamaster 300m diver. I have the rubber strap with the white face because it's beautiful. But then Omega brought this out, and it kind of threw a spanner in the works. But anyways, enough of my ramble. Let's get hands-on with this watch and cover the specs, go into the detail of the dial and that beautiful movement. And before I go on to that, thank you so much for requesting that we review this watch. Remember, if you want us to review any watches in particular or do any versus videos, let me know in the comments. Beginning with the case diameter, it comes in at 41mm, which is pretty perfect for my wrists. As you guys will know, I have 6.5-inch wrists, so they're a little slimmer, and I'd probably cap it at about 42, maybe at a push 43. So this sits quite comfortably in that 38 to 42 range. We are going to use the digital calipers. I know that I had a comment about the digital calipers. That is what they are called, and we're gonna measure the thickness at the moment. So the thickness comes in at about 14.5mm, maybe just below that. So it has a quite nice thickness to it. It sits quite nicely below a shirt cuff and is a little bit thinner than my Omega Seamaster 300m diver that I own, but it still has nice weight to it and a nice thickness. It's not slim enough to be a dress watch. The lug to lug width comes in at 48mm, so it is quite a compact piece. It's a little more compact than my Omega Seamaster 300m diver, and actually the lugs aren't as elongated as my 300m diver. The bracelet is integrated into the case, which looks really, really nice. The bracelet and the case are made from stainless steel, and the case and the bracelet as well have a combination of polished and brushed steel. This gives a really, really nice contrast. The center link in the bracelet is brushed, whereas the outer links are polished, so they reflect the light really, really nicely. The case actually has quite angular curves, and it kind of goes down quite drastically. And I think that kind of has an impact on the more compact look of this watch. It's not elongated, it kind of falls off quite quickly. And now we get on to the weight of this watch. It does feel quite sturdy to me. It feels like there's a lot of steel in this watch. It would help if we turned the scales on before we put this on. So it comes in at 154 grams. And just as a comparison, so that you know, I'm going to put my Tudor Blancpain ETA on the scales at the moment, so you know the weight difference between the brands. Obviously, this isn't comparable because my Blancpain is got some links taken out of it and it's a totally different movement. But it comes in at 160 grams, which is kind of the same weight as the Seamaster 300m Heritage Edition, which is a good weight. And to me, it feels like you're putting something quality on your wrist without your wrist being weighed down, is what I would describe that as. Now, of course, this is just a reference, and the reason that I reference whatever watch I have on in my wrist is most of these watches that we get in are new. So I think it's good for you to know what the older versions and other models weigh so that you can compare. So I think that's a good comparison. Alternatively, you could come into the Chisholm Hunter store, where we're official authorized retailers for Omega watches, or shop through our website, which is linked below. This model is of course water resistant to 300 meters, and that is supported by the crown. Now, the crown is different to the Omega Seamaster diver that I have at home. It's kind of like an onion crown, apart from a little bit smaller. I'm actually not sure whether I prefer this or mine at home. I think my Omega Seamaster diver, when I'm turning the crown, can get a little bit more difficult because of the crown guards, but this doesn't have the crown guards. And it actually reminds me of a video that we did quite recently. We recently reviewed the Longines Conquest model, and I'll link it up here if you want to see it, but I think that the Longines Conquest has done kind of what this watch has done. It took some of the best features from the Longines Hydra Conquest, but made its own kind of line and unique look. I feel that's kind of what this has done. I mean, it's dropped a lot. It's dropped the crown guards, it's dropped that big chunky bezel. It's dropped quite a lot, but it's kept the same DNA. Sticking in with that dress theme, the glass is actually domed sapphire crystal glass with anti-reflective coating on the underbelly. Now, this is characteristic of dress watches. If you look back at dress watches, they normally have that domed sapphire crystal glass, especially years ago. So you can see the heritage theme kind of running through there. Then you get to the bezel. The bezel is a lot slimmer, and it's kind of a matte black with tanned numerals. It has a dot at the top, which doesn't have an arrow. And something that I would really, really like is if this little dot had maybe a splash of red at the arrow. To me, that would really just... But on that note, as you guys will all know, I tend to make up watches in my head, and I think that they're really, really cool. It's just a personal preference that I would add, but if you want to remain with that heritage theme, then the dot works. So I can understand why they've used it. The bezel clicks, as you guys know, that's subtle. That's nice. It's a unidirectional bezel. Fair enough. The dial on this watch, to be honest, is brilliant. And let me describe why it is absolutely awesome. The indices and the hands, the hour markers, are lowered, and they're in a different color. They're in sort of a tanned color. It almost reminds me of the color that they used on the James Bond 007 version that was in the latest James Bond. It's that kind of sandy, tanned color. And because they're dropped, firstly, they're more visible to the eye, and it also adds that extra depth. It's awesome. The 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock marks are all the same kind of lowered, sandy texture, and it's really, really easy to read. I like the color combination they've used here. It's kind of like a matte black dial with these sort of sandy numerals, and it looks heritage. It looks like your stereotypical heritage watch, and it feels that way as well. I mean, it's gone back to just the simplicity of reading the time. There's no date window, there's no power reserve, there's no complications on it that will take away from just reading the time. The hands are all different shapes, which I love. The hour marker has a triangle, the minute marker is almost like a long, thin triangle, and the second hand has that circular end to it. And this dial has so much depth to me, and we haven't even got to the best bit. I mean, you have those lowered numerals and lowered hour markers, and then you have the black base of the dial, and then you have the hands. You have the hour marker, minute marker, and second marker. It's just so deep, it almost seems to encapsulate you in the dial. But let's take a look at the best bit. How incredible does this look? As you can see, everything has lume. Everything has that super luminova, apart from the minute hand and the little dot here are green, and the rest of it are blue. You can see the lume coming through the bezel there as well. It's just unbelievable. This is the best lume I've seen in a watch, genuinely. By the way, you might be wondering why we have the Grand Seiko sitting beside us, the Cherry Blossom, as it's so rightfully been nicknamed as, and it's because the channel's growing, guys. Because of you, we are able to review watches all day. This is now the full-time job for Drew and I, so a huge thank you, and if you could hit that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. I have to say, it's quite funny, never did I ever think that the obsession would become the full-time job. It's just absolutely mad to me, so I'm so glad that you guys are enjoying these videos that Drew and I create, and with that said, let's get to the movement. Before I move on to the movement, I did miss a key feature on the bracelet, so I'll go over it now. So when you have the quick release functionality, the sort of deployment clasp here, you also have macro adjustment functionality. This ensures that it fits perfectly to your wrist and is actually a lot more useful than you'd think. The movement is the Omega Caliber 8912. It has 60 hours of power, a coaxial escapement, and let's get into some of the details, because you know what? Omega never ceases to amaze me. I'm gonna say that right now. Never ceases to amaze me. The movement is, of course, an automatic self-winding movement with a coaxial escapement. It's certified by Master Chronometer and approved by METAS. It can reach magnetic fields of 15,000 Gauss. It has a free sprung balance with silicone balance spring, 2 barrels mounted in series, and automatic winding in both directions. And to top this all off, all of this can be seen through the gorgeous open case bag. Omega do not hold back with their movements. I've said this before in another review. I honestly think if you take Omega's price point and compare it to other luxury watches within the same price point, Omega's movements will dominate. You know, when I was younger, I was always attracted to the more sporty feel. The Omega Seamaster, Tudor Black Bays, Rolex Mariners, the sports of the sports watch. And I kind of disregarded heritage watches. It just didn't come to mind. It wasn't that I didn't like them. They just never really came up in conversation. This changes things a little bit. I have to say, I'm quite a big fan of this watch, and I think that the older I get, I'm only 24, but the older I get and the more mature I eventually become, the more time I have for heritage watches, the more that I appreciate the history within the heritage watches. And it's funny how that happens in life. When you get older, you appreciate things more. And I think this deserves the appreciation. It's almost like when you're younger and the first car you gravitate towards is always fast, it's always ferocious, it's always loud. But then when you get older and you get more mature, you go for something that's more sophisticated, more stylized, like an E-type Jag. It's almost like you're not trying to prove anything anymore. Whereas when you were younger, you wanted to show off. This doesn't need to show off. It is what it is. It's brilliant quality. You get all the functionality of a diving watch in a classic heritage piece. And that's all you need to know. Wow, I tell you what, that got deep quick. It's funny, philosophy and watches almost have more in common than you might think. So if you want your next philosophy lesson, join the Chisholm Hunter watch community right here, and I'll see you next time.